in a sense, what as an agent for the Victorian approaches in this area. But we have local government as well, because local government rezones all of our best horticultural land and turns it into houses. So we have this major problem. So you can see why it's a wicked problem. How do we solve this? We actually do need concerted effort, particularly from consumer force, but we need the industry force. We also need a multitude of others to actually move forward. So your passion, but everybody else as well.
So let's take to everybody else. Rob mentioned the producers, the growers. Affordability is something that comes up a lot, but it's impossible to make vegetables cheaper because by asking the grower to make them cheaper because they're already at a pinch. So Michael, what are your thoughts as CEO of AusVeg?
Yeah, this affordability question is a real challenge for the industry moving forward. So, we've all seen the $12 lettuce scenario over the course of this year due to, weather events and supply chain disruptions. Aussie producers are some of the most effective, efficient and productive in the world and are always striving to find efficiencies in their business to supply product to the market at a competitive price. We know from the research in this report that, a large portion of those surveyed were saying that price and affordability is a key barrier for buying more fresh vegetables. But we also know at an industry level, a recent survey that AusVeg has done of members has said that 20 growers' businesses are experiencing an average of 25% increase in their cost of doing business at the moment. So, fuel's doubled, energy prices are up, whether it's fertiliser, seed, a whole lot of inputs are leading to a higher cost environment for producers to keep supplying product to Australian consumers. So we've got consumers saying it's too expensive and growers saying our costs are going up. These two things are in direct conflict, but there's a huge economic benefit for the industry if we can get more Australians eating an additional serve of vegetables a day. Some of the preliminary research that's led to where we are today has said that an extra serve for every Australian by 2030 will lead to about $1 billion in additional farm income in this country, which has got benefits across the regional economy at an industry level and an individual grower level. So we know that for every job that's created in the food supply chain supports an additional job in the regional economy. At an industry level, there's that $1 billion income, increase in income across the sector, and at a grower level, increased grower returns mean increased levy funds getting reinvested back into the R&D system, which can then help drive further transformational change and productivity gains into the future to keep costs at or prices, I guess, at a level that consumers can afford moving forward.
Let alone the savings that the public health system can make by having people have better nutrition, better health. Now, I want to ask Stephen, with regards to food waste within the sector and at a consumer level as well, what kind of inroads is the food waste CRC making within these sectors?
Thanks, Alice. If I can just touch on some of the results from this report first. I mean, the fact that we saw people saying that over 40% were saying, really concerned about food waste, and that's why we're not eating more vegetables. In one way, that was a good thing to see from someone who's trying to promote, the issue of food waste. In another way, it's an awful thing to see because we don't want people not eating good fruit and vegetables because they're worried about wasting them. So we do need to get that balance right, and that comes back to the education messages around packaging and preparing and so on, which is part of a national behaviour change campaign we're really pushing for with the Australian government at the moment. But I think what we saw with these results is that at the start of the pandemic, there was panic buying, and I'm sure everyone's aware of that. And because of that, there was a lot of food waste. And then by the time that wave was over, people didn't want to go back to the supermarket, so they weren't buying fresh fruit and veg. And so, we've seen a shift in the diet because of that. Unfortunately, we haven't seen the shift back, and that's what we really need to be promoting. So CRC's 4 years in. We've got lots of individual industry projects at the moment. What we are looking for now is the big game changers, and that behaviour change campaign that you mentioned right at the start of your introduction is where we want to be heading.
And Sandro, you mentioned communities, making sure that everybody feels a part of this conversation. Some people can't afford the food in the first place to be able to waste it. How do we make sure that everybody can feel like they can be included in this strategy?
Yeah, well, I think, so the two questions. how do you make sure that more people can afford fresh, healthy food? There is no single silver bullet, but really what we've been talking about, many of the solutions lie, in these areas. So, we know a third of food is wasted, whether that's pre-market as food loss or after as food waste. That comes at a huge environmental cost, but also an economic cost. It drives up the prices. So, making serious inroads on food waste should, in theory, bring down prices. But there are lots of other things that we need to be looking at as well. So the power of procurement of government. We don't have a school lunch program in Victoria. Many jurisdictions around the world have actually used school lunch programs. The ability for governments to safely and long-term, secure very large contracts with growers and actually reform from the supply side, incentivise reform in what is being produced, provide the certainty for transition, which farmers need, and maybe even give a premium because at the end of the day, higher quality produce then going into the hands of young kids gets all of those co-benefits across society, which we can actually now model and show. So I think there's not going to be a single silver bullet. It's going to be, deploying and investing in technology and R&D. It's going to be about incentivising transitions to healthier diets and primarily plant-forward diets. And it's going to be reducing food waste. We're going to need to use lots of tools across those three major levers. In terms of making sure that, broader, everyone's part of the conversation, I think the main reflection I would have as a CEO of an agency is that actually a lot of the solutions lie in local communities. If you take the time to visit, to listen, and to stand beside community leaders, as we saw through COVID, and I think Rob would agree, the single biggest Achilles heel of our system was that it was a centralised command and conquer type approach. Other states didn't have that. They did better, and we've now reformed our system to be more disseminated, and Rob leads one of those local public health units. We need to be really thinking about this from yes, we need coordination and we need a shared vision of where we're heading, but we do need to make sure that it's led by communities for communities and that there is that bottom-up movement.
Rob, what have been the wins in that local unit that you head up?
We've only just formed, so we can't really look at the wins, but I guess the evidence base for what actually works in this space, it's very challenging, as Linda pointed out, very challenging for actually to make people, in fact, consume and seek fruit and vegetables in that setting. But we have had a number of experiments. One of those, the school-based setting, school-based lunches, training children at school about where they are, because the kids go home and do that. I still remember with glee when my, then she was an 8-year-old daughter, came home to tell us that I said, what did you do at school? We talked about the value of vegetables. Now, we all need to eat more fruit and vegetables, and I just pointed to the plate in front of her, which was full of them, and I said, eat your broccoli. But I think in the sense of workplace, we did an experiment here in Victoria, which has been also replicated in other settings around the world, where workplaces were asked to actually look at healthy food consumption. And it worked, but it was defunded. And so this continuity of the idea of actually doing this, changing the behaviour, we know that place-based population health works. General approaches through marketing campaigns and other things have a minimal effect, but we know that the intense work in these place-based setting works. So imagine at the work site, we're eating healthily, so you're suddenly changing your behaviours. Every 5 days a week, your behaviours have changed. So it actually spills to the home. And so suddenly everyone else at home is doing the same thing, just like schools.
And Linda, Medibank is an example of an organisation that is building a community where you're encouraging positive behaviours. What have been some of the wins for you with those programs?
Medibank, as a large private health insurer, has a vested interest in ensuring our members are as healthy and live as long as possible. So it makes complete sense that we support preventative health interventions, and we've been having an increasing investment over many years. In the Eat Healthily space, we've had a Live Better program really involved around 3 pillars, one of which is eating, and we've now got 500,000 of our members working with us in a way to encourage them to eat better, exercise and look after their mental health. So it's a really long-term, strong campaign I'm really proud of in terms of really starting to impact on Australia's health.
Imagine that on a multi-million person scale. Amazing. I've got a question here that I'm going to read verbatim because it just speaks to so much. It's something that you mentioned earlier, Linda. We all know that kids prefer ice cream over broccoli. Why? Why do we all know that? How do we change the value perception of vegetables to make them something that people actually want to eat rather than have to eat? I'm going to throw it out to whoever wants to take it. Lucinda?
I was very fortunate last week actually to be over in Tasmania for the launch of a program by Eat Well Tassie called Too Good to Waste. And it was amazing, and it made me reflect as a mother of 3 primary school aged children how I can change their view on vegetables. And what was really amazing about it and so incredible was that the focus was not, you know, on necessarily what you're doing with it, but having that emotional attachment to, I'm going to use the carrot, to the link to the love that's been gone into growing the carrot, the duration that it's been growing, then the harvesting of it, and then it finally ending up on your plate. And it's like, oh, how dare you waste half the carrot now and chop it out, you know? And I think that was just something absolutely beautiful, which really resonated and seems to be working very well in Tassie. Particularly engaging with that, the school setting, with the local producers, connecting them to the, you know, the restaurants and the chefs, engaging with that. And I think that is just incredible. Obviously, Victoria, we're a completely different state, but there's still, to your point, Sandro, so many opportunities within the local setting that we can leverage. But I also think, you know, there is already so much fantastic work going on out there. We know that the Health Advisory Service in Victoria, along with the Achievement Program under the Vic Kids Eat Well banner. Sorry, a few words there. But, you know, this is providing systems change. We're supporting the environment to make changes. So where people, you know, children, where everyone goes, there is that change so they can eat, live and, you know, play and be healthy. And so I think once we can create those opportunities, again, I think it was Rob who mentioned it, that we've got then everyone going back home and sort of trying to drive that change as well. But again, to reiterate everybody's point, we need to have, you know, bipartisan support at a federal level, and it needs to flow down from the top down and the bottom up and sideways, and we all need to be collaborating and realise that this problem's bigger than all of our egos, and we need to put them aside and address the situation.
So let's talk about it.
Sorry, can I just add something, Alice? So I totally agree, and I think, again, it shows the kind of nuanced and mature approach that is required to what is a complex and some would say a wicked challenge. Because on one hand, and I think the irony of me, you know, I think it would be the definition of mansplaining if I explained to you how to engage children in fruit and vegetables. This is your shtick and something you've led on in Australia for almost a decade on. So maybe I'll ask you the question in a second. But where I do also think we need to be really careful is that it's about shaping norms. It's about giving parents the time. It's about giving them the skills, the confidence to engage with their kids, to build a sense of connection and belonging, to make sure that they, you know, again, time, resources, finances, skills. It's a complex issue of why parents don't necessarily have the ability, the access, the affordability to sit down and, you know, and engage their kids with love in maybe a way that I had as a very privileged person growing up in an Italian family. For me, my earliest childhood memories were of love and food. That's not the same, and that's not because of poor parenting. It's because we don't put the supports and structures around families to allow them to do that. The other piece is that we bombard children from the earlier stages with food messages in the opposite direction, whether it's social media and making them feel terrible about themselves, or whether it's ultra processed foods that are full of fat, sugar, and salt, highly profitable, highly processed, and not the foods we want children to be eating. But they're wrapped up with brands that kids from 3 years of age start to see, start to learn. And so the norms that are being shaped, it's offsetting on their plate those good foods. So we need to, yes, engage young people in healthy foods and support parents to do that, and look at the actual structural drivers that get in the way of parents who all want the best for their kids to be able to do that with their kids and for their kids. But the second is also actually protect children from digital and other forms of marketing that get in and you know, get around parents and make their jobs just so much harder.
If I could just make a quick comment, completely agree we need that early education piece, but I think we also need to adapt to what a younger audience is looking for. And we're in Victoria, there's been some fantastic work done here on upcycled foods, using surplus fruit and veg, makes it into healthy snacking, makes it in, you know, we've got a potato ice cream that's been developed in South Australia and it's fantastic. So let's also adapt to the audience as well.
That's it. And on the topic of the audience, the time is ripe. Our national broadcaster, the ABC, has just launched Your Move, which for the month of October and November focuses on improving Australian health outcomes. If there was ever a time for us to be loudly crying out for a national policy or strategy, now is the time. And I'm going to ask each of you what one thing you think, one thing you think will help to drive change. And I'm going to ask you to grab your smartphones out, and whether you tweet it out or take a video, just share this, amplify it, so that again, we can create that groundswell of noise within the space. Linda, I'll start with you.
I think the one thing is helping young people really understand why fruit and vegetables make you feel better, why they're critical to your health. I think there's a real movement amongst young people to want to be fit and healthy, and getting the message that vegetables are part of that would be a really powerful move for us.
I'd say cross-sector support and reducing the duplication that might happen across all these different sorts of initiatives. Just talking about the education piece for children, I know at an industry level, we've got a lot of examples across the country where locally different producers are opening farms to, you know, all these Kids on Farms program. I know Valicia Farms here in Werribee in Melbourne has taken over 1,000 kids through their farm over the last year or two, and there's other examples like that. 3,000, sorry, Catherine. But, you know, there's a whole lot of those really good programs that are out there, but they need to not happen in isolation, have consistent messaging and be drawn together across the whole, you know, across that whole initiative as part of this national behaviour change campaign.
I guess my key message is really, if we're going to do a nationwide behaviour change campaign, let's make it integrated. So let's not just focus on food waste with one ad and you know, increasing vegetable consumption with another ad and so on, because that's mixed messaging. And the behaviour change campaigns that work are the simple ones, that slip, slop, slap. People get it, people change their behaviour. So that's what we'll need to be looking for. And I will finish with a little bit of a plug around, let's also look at adapting to the audience as well around that upcycled food, because we're only at the infancy of what we can do in that space.
Thank you. I agree with everybody. 2 points. One, I think we need to focus on getting kids to love vegetables, making vegetables a hero, absolutely. Secondly, there are so many amazing programs out there, interventions that are working within the local community, state settings. An overarching behaviour change campaign needs to, you know, absolutely tap into all of those initiatives, but for those initiatives to be identified and leveraged, which are working and are making an impact as well. So we're not reinventing the wheel, so that we can really get that groundswell and make sustained, you know, change forever.
Yeah, I'd like to see a national food system strategy. I'd like to see one that reflects the ecological, economic and health crises that are unfolding around us, and that embeds behaviour change, including a national campaign, in that wider strategy.
So I'm going to lift it up even higher than that, Sandra. I'm going to take it to that we actually need a national whole of government strategy. The importance of this has the benefits right across so many sectors. If you want jobs and growth, this is a high employment sector. This is rural and regional, which we need to do as well in this country. This is related to our climate environment. This is related to our health, our work, our productivity, our education systems, our transport systems. I'll even get tired running through this. That's why it's whole of government approach. We need sustained and focused leadership from the top. And that needs to be replicated with our premiers as well, and also the mayors across all of our councils. All of them working together on one issue. Now, there's something amusing that we actually have been doing over the last 2 years, although it's petering out. If you go back to the start of 2020, we started to work as one government on one issue. And we can do it in this country. Let's turn it around to another issue that we can do it on this. That's why we performed okay with COVID compared to other countries. But we can produce much better responses to something that's much more pressing and much more important to all of us as Australians.
Work proactively. Thank you all for incredible additions to this conversation. I'm going to ask for your contributions now with questions. We've got a roving mic, which is probably my mic. There we go. Goodbye.
One of the things we've kind of skipped over a little bit is affordability. We are in a kind of an inflationary phase, which we're not used to. I finished uni when interest rates were at 15%. So, you know, we've seen nothing like this for 30 years. Are veggies really expensive if we look at a cost per serve? And, you know, we have raised in the report the recommendation to change the way we price it at retail by cost per serve or some other, because you hear these really big numbers, Michael, around something being worth $20, but that's not, that you could feed a family potentially on that. But I just wanted the panel to just revisit affordability on a cost per serve basis, because I don't think veggies are as expensive as some people think.
That's right. It's a value piece. The issue is people aren't valuing vegetables and they think it sounds expensive, but they'll buy cigarettes or they'll buy a cup of coffee and not question the price. So a lot of it, I think we've heard quite clearly that it's not as simple as we can make vegetables cheaper in Australia. And so it is about changing, it is an issue nonetheless. So then it's about how do you make people revalue vegetables so they start thinking that $5 for a kilo of capsicums is actually really good value. And, you know, that's about shopping smart as well and buying vegetables when they're in season. And there's other ways that you can help lower the affordability without expecting it to come from the providers of the vegetables.
Fully agree, Linda. And the point that was made around looking at how vegetables are priced in store is one that should be potentially explored, because, you know, if you see a kilo of beans for $20, for example, and in store, but you only need, you know, 100 grams or 200 grams, it's, you know, it is a disincentive to purchase. So there's a lot of regulations around these types of things that will need to be looked at. But there's an opportunity there to address it in that fashion.
Maybe I'll just quickly add then. Oh, I've got a microphone, I keep forgetting. I can add whatever I want. It is also more, you know, I don't want to sound like a boring academic, everything's more complex. So I know everyone knows things are complex, but at the same time, you know, so if you look at the work of Mandy Lee, she's shown that, you know, you can buy a basket of fruits and vegetables and feed your family for less cost than, you know, fast food or processed foods. What that doesn't integrate, which she openly acknowledges, is, you know, preference, taste, and convenience. And it's the time cost. It's the fact that we're building cities where people are, you know, maybe less so now, but again, a huge equity gradient. Many of us can work from home, but lower income workers, it's less flexible. So they're still spending hours in the car, working 2 jobs. Like, we know these realities. So I think the evidence does show actually that price is the single biggest factor when it comes to buying these products. I don't fully think it's as simple, and I know no one's saying that as people just don't value vegetables. I think it's far more complex, the lived experience of people living in poverty than that. We also know that if you increase minimum incomes, if you provide universal minimum incomes, if you increase social welfare, what do people spend it on? They spend it on food. They spend it on the basics. They don't go out and buy more cigarettes. They actually spend it on putting better food on their table. And what have we seen over the last 2 years as prices increase, not just here, but around the world? The first thing that we're seeing is a shift in diets, people moving away from a focus on organic, on ethical sourcing, on, you know, the certified certain ethical certifications, moving towards, and this is in the UK, this is in the US, this is in Europe, and this is here in Australia. They're substituting foods for cheaper foods, for more processed foods, and for foods that are home brand. So I think price is still the most sensitive issue for consumers, but it's the cost of being able to cook, you know, engage with food. It's not the whole solution, but I think we need to be careful not to think that it's still the main factor.
If I can just add one quick comment, vegetables themselves may not be expensive, but if they're being wasted, then it does.
That's also
add up.
true.
And that's what's on people's mind. So that's, you know, what we need to be addressing. If you're not wasting them, then they go a lot further and you're not thinking about the cost.
Thank you guys for the panel today. It's been really interesting and the work in the report too. I'm Claire McClelland. I'm the CEO of the Australian Fresh Produce Alliance. We represent 13 of Australia's largest horticulture producers, so about half the value of fresh produce in Australia. I think I will end with a question, but just a couple of kind of broad-based points just like to make. I think the conversation about there being no silver bullet from our perspective is really valuable. I think if we kind of look at the food security problem broadly, I would say that, you know, it kind of starts with the fact that Australia has a housing affordability crisis. And by the time Australians have paid their rent or their mortgage and covered their bills, food becomes inherently discretionary. And I'd just make the point that while we obviously come down to this affordability point, it's actually the confluence of factors that make this a really challenging and wicked problem to solve. I think when we come down to affordability, my question kind of comes down to how do we integrate policy that will help with the production of fresh fruit and vegetables with some of these broader objectives around health and well-being? Because for me, the value for everybody in this space is actually having sustainable and productive horticulture producers, because without sustainable and productive horticulture businesses, you know, what are we doing here? So I think, you know, the questions around access and availability and sustainability really come down to the integration between public policy across all of these areas, education, health, and the policy that advocacy groups like the AFPA, AusVeg, and others in the industry have been talking about. So I suppose the question to the panel is really understanding that perhaps we have some relatively niche problems in horticulture around access to international markets, trade, and a whole confluence of sustainability issues. How do we work collectively to integrate production policy needs with broader public policy? Thank you.
Great question.
Yep, so certainly my time at CSIRO was spent a lot on trying to answer some of those questions, working with industry on new ways of production and making sure that you don't actually have a deleterious effect on the nutritional benefits of the product that you're actually doing. So efficiencies in the production, efficiencies in the species that you're producing, ways of actually producing it so you don't have to use as many other inputs such as sprays and things because of disease resistance and things like this. That requires a solid investment. And then into the food waste area, we minimise that by looking at new and novel ways of food preservation, which of course actually enhances our export markets by actually doing that, so that the person in Japan who's buying our broccoli is buying it at its prime, rather than, you know, we pre-pick our bananas. And you have to wait for a couple of months before they're damn well ripe enough for you to eat, let alone what we're doing with our export areas there. So, excuse me, we actually do need a continued and concerted effort into the research and development, supported research and development at that front end to actually help producers be and become more efficient. We've done it in other industries. This is just an industry in that sort of perspective. I don't know whether you've got comment on some of these things from the CRC perspective.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if we look to some of the meat industries, you know, red meat industry is incredibly efficient.
Yep.
And we've got to do exactly the same with the horticulture industry. And, you know, I think vegetable waste, fruit waste has been seen as a cost of doing business for too long. And it's just something we need to start addressing more. There's plenty of options out there, and little plug, keen to work with any organisations, whether through Stop Food Waste Australia or the Fight Food Waste CRC. But yeah, we're really at that infancy still, I think, of what we can do in this sustainability space.
And I suppose what I'm hearing is that within this strategy, you're also asking for support for that sector as well, for the horticulture sector.
Yeah, I think my comments really just go to this no silver bullet, and that, you know, if we're not actually supporting the production of food, then I'm not really sure how we have a conversation more broadly on affordability and the flow-on effects. And it seems like we kind of negate the fact that we need to actually support in a whole of government sense what we're actually doing on farms to produce the food, because it goes to all of these issues, but then add the overlay of, you know, what is actually happening economically in Australia right now, driving the challenges around affordability, and that, you know, I think where we can all work together collectively is in a whole of support for some of the policy pieces that horticulture producers are actually interested in to actually help their businesses be more sustainable, both, you know, in a people, planet and profit sense. Because if all farmers go out of business, where's the food coming from?
So our hosts may be alarmed when I sort of talk about our economic models for analysis are flawed. And we do need to look at this as a whole ecosystem with regards to that, rather than, oh, the producer produces this at this cost base and there's the price point when it's actually sold to the wholesaler. That's not the whole economic picture of the fruit and vegetable journey. So we actually need to look at that. What's the end impact, which of course is a healthy, robust community in many different measures and ways. So I probably put it back to our hosts and say, please broaden your economic models to actually include the impacts, which is really what you're talking about, because you're being unfairly judged by saying, oh, look how expensive it is. Well, is it expensive, which is what you were saying?
Exactly.
No, it's not, because look at the benefits down the chain with regards to that. So sorry, economists in the room.
And I'd also make a point on value. It's really interesting that I think, again, Catherine Felicia, farmer in the room, but made a point to me at a conference not long ago that the only time people started talking about iceberg lettuce was when it was $12, and that before that producers had been told not to grow it because it's not popular with consumers, and now it's $12. Everyone wants iceberg and there's not enough. So, you know, what actually is the confluence? But yeah, I think, you know, how do we actually support the sustainable production of food, for me, is the question to unlock a lot of these answers. Anyway, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mark Priest. I'm from a company called Empower. We developed a food loss and waste technology piece, which was born out of Stop Food Waste Australia and Steve CRC. I've been whole food plant-based for 10 years, so I would have crawled across broken glass on a personal note to be here today. Make no mistake about it, we're at war. This is going to take decades. It's a bit like, you know, facing the coal industry. And Simon, if we don't have the secret sauce to pull this together, it won't work, because this is just such a huge problem, so fragmented. I'd just like some feedback on, I'd like to pick on 3 words. One of them's been mentioned today, and it's the word taste. We're laced, processed food is laced with SOS. It's not food. These are highly refined chemicals, sugar, oil and salt in processed food. And when you move, and the reason is a piece of chocolate, a chocolate bar will be so more attractive to a piece of broccoli, is because of the dopamine hit to the brain, and it'll never compete, right? So when you can increase through various programs to get children to understand what these foods are important, their taste buds actually change. And you need to be on the other side to actually understand that. If you move to a whole food plant-based, I'm not suggesting we should, in 90 days, your taste buds have changed. But there's 2 words I'd like to draw on that actually haven't been mentioned today, but it's behind it. One is fibre. We're saying eat more fruit and vegetables. And the other word is protein. Yeah. Now, there's not one person in this room I would back that has a protein deficiency or ever in their lives met a person with a protein deficiency. It doesn't exist around the world, and we've been sold on protein. So if you can push fibre to the front of the mind like the industries have for protein, you'll win the war. It's rather than, and if you can move to 35 grams a day of fibre, that will go well on your way. Mother's milk has 5% protein per calories, calories. It's perfect. Plant foods happen to have 10%. You need to consume less than 1,000 calories a day to have a protein deficiency, and yet we're all, I've got to have my protein. If 97% of the Western world are devoid of fibre. Now we can call it fruit and vegetables, but perhaps that could be, let them push protein, don't criticise it, don't start a war, but if you can push fibre you're going to drag the fruit and vegetables through. So just a comment on that. Taste, food and fibre, and perhaps follow what the industry's done on protein.
Thank you. Dragging the fruit and vegetables through with fibre sounds like a really great pun too. Now, I think we have time for just one more question, if anyone...
I've actually got a question online, Alice, from Roxanne. From Roxanne at the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions. Roxanne notes, talking about some of the new formats of vegetables that are available in supermarkets, pointing to convenience. Can these support the increase in consumption, and how much more can we get out of more convenient formats in the supermarkets?
Yeah. So at CSIRO, we did a lot of work on consumer preference and purchasing power with the industry support, and certainly from the retailer's perspective. And I got a lot of flack when we moved into pre-prepared meals. But the sad fact is that 60+% of Australians eat pre-prepared meals. So we need to shift the nutritional status of those pre-prepared meals over. I mean, I find it really sad, because that means their passion for cooking, for producing food, all the things that I hold dear to me, they're not doing. I can't see why you'd need to buy one, but that's what happens. And by increasing the health of those, the components of those meals, and trying to direct people towards the purchase of those is a bold experiment that's still going on in this country in that setting. Prior to that, I mean, this model, of course, came from the Heart Foundation TIC, where, of course, we got hammered when we turned around to try to actually look at healthy takeout foods and things like that. But that actually worked. But we had to pull it back because it just wasn't worth the pain from what we were actually getting from a multitude of settings. And the industry did change. I've got plenty of evidence for that, that actually did certainly a lot of, it's a dirty industry, but they actually changed in a number of settings, didn't they? So, which is exciting, but it's coming back to that idea of yes, there is a market there. And that's why we worked with the retail sector with industry support to actually try this model.
It's probably worth mentioning that, frozen fruit and veg were, particularly veg, were created to address a lot of the things that had been identified in this report. And they've come a long way in recent decades. And so, there is an answer out there already. We don't necessarily have to reinvent it. But I think there is still, a lot we can do in kind of innovative foods and things like that. CSIRO's done some great work. There's some great work going on in Victoria. And, there's a lot we can do in this space.
And if I can just add, I mean, we, at an industry level, we want to see people eating fresh, as much fresh produce as possible. Certainly those snacking or more convenient lines are a growing category and are probably part of the solution, but they're not the whole solution.
No.
And at the coalface, what I can say is that I have never written as many words on frozen veg as I have in the past few years. Consumers are interested in it, and if it drives more vegetable consumption, more fibre consumption, then that's A-OK too. If that's what gets them there, it's a removal of a barrier, right? And really, I want to thank you all for helping to remove the barrier to entry to anybody that wasn't able to make it to this conversation today. It's up to each of us to advocate on behalf of this report, on behalf of this national bipartisan strategy that is going to help the whole country to have better health outcomes, and learn to love vegetables because they taste delicious, not just because they should eat them because of the nutritional value, because we know that doesn't really work. And honestly, I have gleaned so many insights from this panel. It's been so valuable to me personally, and I can see by the entire room to everyone here and everybody that tuned in at home. Thank you. Thank you all. Please give our illustrious panel a big round of applause. And that brings us to the last of the official proceedings. Michelle just did a weird thing. Is that wants to take a photo before you come off stage? No?
We have a special, door prize, but it's under your seat. So if you have a look under your seats, have a feel around, only under your own seats. And if you find a carrot under there, come up to the stage and Alice will tell you about the gift.
All right. Yay! Yay! Congratulations! Woo!
You get to keep the carrot.
Woohoo! The most valuable thing ever. You've won a copy of The Joy of Better Cooking. So congratulations. thank you again to all of you for coming along. We have all won today, really. This has been so insightful. Thank you for all of your questions, all of your participation. Lucinda Hancock with some final words from Nutrition Australia.
National Nutrition Week is coming up on the 16th of October, and it's all about veg. So head to tryfor5.org and you'll be able to download a lot of recipes, both with fresh, frozen, canned vegetables. So please encourage everyone to get on board. Thank you.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks so much.
Lucinda, one thing we should probably